Hi, friends. Welcome to episode 7 of our science fiction book read along. We are still reading the book The Terraformers by Annalee Newitz. Today, we are going to read chapter 10 because it's a short chapter, and then we're going to pick up the pace a little bit. I've been doing these recordings every couple of days, and the next one, we're going to switch to chapter 14 and read the first few pages, and then we're going to go about the same pace through the end of May, hopefully wrapping up the book by the end of May. So about 4 chapters every couple of days. The chapters are pretty short, so it's about 20-25 pages a jump. Anyway, as always, looking forward to hearing your comments. Please message me or leave your comments at the end of this video. Let me know what you're thinking, what you like, what's piqued your curiosity. Would love to hear people start talking about the science or science related concepts or just anything they enjoy. So with no further ado, I will get started with chapter 10, The Trouble with Plate Tectonics. Everything is part of nature, from the Environmental Rescue Team Handbook. Long wants me to open the door to your sleeping room. Do you mind? As Destry blinked a dream out of her eyes, she reflected orthogonally that Jaguar, the door, had gotten a lot more friendly lately, especially since spending so much time with Hellfire and Crisp. Next to her, Nil was sitting up and clearly a lot more awake. Sure, Jaguar, you can open. Long burst in, still dressed in the coveralls he'd been wearing yesterday when they met Crusher from the boring fleet. His eyes were wide with panic. There's something I've discovered that you need to know about right now. Those lava tunnels. There's something the Archaeans haven't been telling us. Destry was fully awake now. What is it? I can't tell you here. Just get dressed and come with me. Wordlessly, she and Nil yanked down their coveralls and breathers, following Long up the dorm hallway. Things were quieter at this time of night, though they could still hear the sounds of people working the late shift in the ERT labs. The lights were dimmer than during the day, and the on-duty rangers were mostly nocturnal. 2 owls flew through on their way to the experimental forest lava tube, and in one corner of the room, a group of raccoons was clumped around a gas chromatograph locked in silent debate, sending furious texts about some contaminants they found in a sample. Long led them directly to the center of the room, where Crusher from the boring fleet had met them. The floor was still transparent. Remember that? Long pointed at the thin metal barrier Destry had noticed slicing through the chamber the day before. It gleamed dully in the orange light, looking almost like a biological membrane. You asked Lucky what that was, and they brushed it off. Well, I decided to look into it, and well, just take a look at this. Long pulled up a wadded-up screen from his pocket and smoothed it out on the ground next to Nil and Destry. Squatting down, they watched as he gestured up at the strange map they had seen yesterday on the wall screens, the one with black lines connecting all the lava plumes. I looked up the metadata for this map in the Spider ERT database. Those black lines correspond to a system of heating elements called ribbons, which are installed deep in Sasky's crust all over the planet. Long shook his head, bleary, and rubbed some stubble that had started on his chin. And we're looking at part of it. Down there, that thing, it can heat up to 1,960 Kelvin, enough to boil rock. So it's in a chamber of boiling rock. Now that Destry understood she was seeing one strand in a much larger network, she peered at the silvery ribbon with renewed interest. What in the fermented turd pit is it for? Nil asked peevishly. At that moment, the raccoons burst into chittery laughter, responding to something one of them had texted. It was hard to shake the feeling that the raccoons were mocking them, a group of puzzled Homo sapiens gawking at a piece of technology they couldn't understand. Long leaned back on his heels and lowered his voice. When Verdant started terraforming the land, they had a very different plan for Sasky than they do now. This was their first time creating an Earth-like world, and some of the VPs wanted to make it as realistic as possible. Before they could do that, though, they needed to jumpstart the carbon cycle. We all learned that this happened by catalyzing photosynthesis in the oceans, farming cyanobacteria that sucked up carbon and converted it into free oxygen. But that was actually Plan B. About 10,000 years ago, Verdant's engineers thought the carbon cycle required plate tectonics. Plate tectonics? What's that? Nil was intrigued. It's based on Earth geophysics, where you've got solid plates of continental crust floating around on a hot sea of mantle rock. When Earth's plates collide, one slides underneath the other, cycling down into the lower layers of the planet. It's called subduction. Plate tectonics turn the planet's guts into a big conveyor belt, with crust sinking down and new crust growing out of volcanic eruptions along ridges in the ocean. Anyway, the hypothesis was that carbon absorbed by Sasky's crust would sink into the planet, and that would create a good cycle. The problem is, Sasky is tectonically dead. No floating crust, no subduction. So they came up with this system to crack the planet's surface into continental plates. Way back in the 40,000s, the Archaea planted these temperature ribbons inside fossilized faults and volcanic ridges. Turning them on would make the planet's lithosphere melt, reactivating old fault lines. Eventually, pieces of the crust would separate into continental plates and start subducting. Long wiped sweat from his forehead. Presto! Plate tectonics and carbon cycling all at the same time. That ribbon goes right underneath Spider, Destry breathed. Does that mean we're over a fault? That's right. This is quake country. At least it would be if somebody turned those ribbons on. Destry could not stop staring at the razor-thin heating element that could rip a mountain apart. She tried to imagine Sasky's crust broken into puzzle pieces, each landmass floating on a cushion of molten rock. Spider Mountain would drift away from the mantle plume below, but the plume itself would remain active, shooting magma out of whatever puzzle piece moved on top of it. Why would Verdant want to do something so dangerous? Destry asked. I mean, a piece of good farmland might accidentally become a volcano. Exactly. With plate tectonics, your volcanoes can move around. But that's not the most common danger. Subduction causes powerful quakes, and those trigger tsunamis and floods. There are a whole lot of ugly knock-on effects from plate tectonics, and all of them make your real estate less valuable. Nil emitted a soft whistle. I can see why Verdant's decided to forego that bit of Earth authenticity then. They dumped that idea as soon as we managed to start the carbon cycle with photosynthesis. Well, technically it wasn't us, Destry sighed. Homo archaeans started the carbon cycle with photosynthesis, and we maintained it. Are the Spider City people still in control of the ribbons? Nil whispered. Do they work? Long nodded. I found data that strongly suggests that they've been testing them every year to make sure they're in good order. If they activate the network, this planet will have plate tectonics long before the new landowners come down to settle it. It would destroy the world. Destry's heart was pounding as she turned to Nil. I wonder when they were planning on telling us about that. I mean, they weren't exactly hiding it. Long found it just by poking around in the ERT computers, right in front of everybody. Nil gestured at the now silent raccoon researchers. That's true. Maybe they didn't think it was relevant. Long stared at the two of them with an expression that hovered between revulsion and shock. You're talking about this like they are hiding some new recipe for oatcakes. This is an existential threat to Sasky. Destry snorted. It's not an existential threat, but it will make Verdant's real estate a lot less valuable. Who wants to deal with volcanoes? These people do. Long's face was getting red and his lips were wet. They love volcanoes. They want to shit magma everywhere. If they wreck Verdant's planet, they won't suffer. We'll be the ones who pay for it. I can't imagine the Archaea doing that, Destry replied. Plate tectonics could destroy Spider, too. Wadding up the map display, Long stood abruptly. Even with Nil's warmth next to her, Destry felt a chill as their colleague looked down at them. This mission has gone from foolish to absurd, and now it's potentially deadly. Nil reached out and gently squeezed Long's hand, still furiously clutching the crumpled map. Friend, it's not the right time to talk about this. Let's meet in the morning and decide how to broach the subject with our hosts. Long said nothing as he stamped out of the room, the raccoons staring at him and then at Dustry and Nil. One stood up and made a face-washing gesture, which for some reason elicited another extended burst of laughter. Leaning his head on Dustry's shoulder, Nil groaned, "Well, that conversation sure decayed fast." "We'll work it out in the morning. Long can be an ass, but Midnight usually talks him down." Nil stood, offering her a hand up. "Let's try to get some rest before we deal with all this swamp gas." They waved goodbye to the raccoons, who grunted and sent them text links to local videos about how to wash your hands before going to work. Dustry had no idea what they were trying to say, so she chalked it up to more weird Spider City humor. Back in their room, Dustry pressed a hand to the wall and signaled the lights to dim, wrapped herself around the curve of Nil's back, and slept fitfully until it was time for breakfast. And that, folks, ends Chapter 10. I look forward to hearing your thoughts, and join us next time for the first few pages of Chapter 14. All right, thanks and good night.